able to trigger the transformational change needed to reach the net zero goals. In this project with the Irish government, we applied our process to Ireland's transport sector with the aim of supporting them in reaching their 2030 and 2050 climate goals. As part of this case study, we conducted interviews with high-level officials and key stakeholders, visited different Irish territories, carried out workshops with climate policymakers, service providers, and academics, and will be producing a policy recommendation report. Based on systems thinking insights, the OECD process consists of 3 steps. Envision the outcomes a well-functioning system achieves, how our streets could look, and how our territories could be transformed. Understand why the current system's functioning is not achieving such outcomes, and which are the dynamics leading us to unsustainable results. Therefore, being able to shift the focus from the consequences to understanding the root causes and tackling high leverage points. Identify policy packages able to redesign systems so that by design, they achieve the envisioned outcomes. Providing a way to achieve GHG emission reductions at the speed required while also improving well-being.
Great. Yeah, so maybe we can start with what was the initial purpose of the project and how did you detect the need for systems change?
Yes, sure. So the initial purpose of the project was to support the Irish government to identify innovative policies to reduce emissions in the transport sector. The Irish government set themselves a very ambitious objective to reduce emissions by half by 2030. And they asked the OECD through a body that is called the Climate Change Advisory Council to support them in the identification of policies that can help them achieve those goals. So that was the purpose. In terms of how we identify the need for systems change, we analyzed their transport system structure, the system's dynamics around the system, and we realized that Ireland, as most countries in the world, have mostly car-dependent systems where cars are the most attractive option and sometimes the only one, and that's the transport mode that most people chooses. So we saw by doing, and I will maybe go into the detail on how we assess that with which tools, but basically we saw that without them transforming their systems from car-dependent systems towards systems that allow people to walk, cycle, and use public transport for the bulk of their trips, they couldn't really arrive to their commitments, to their goals, and they really needed to move further from decarbonizing the current system and to really transform or redesign their system for it not to be car dependent.
Okay, and what was the methodology and tools that you applied?
Yes, so basically we used a combination of tools. What we wanted to identify, so we analyzed, the country has several strategies and several plans to reduce emissions in the sector. We analyzed the key policies in those strategies. To give a few examples: vehicle electrification, budget reallocation towards public transport, etc. And what we tried to assess was the transformative potential of those policies. That is, the potential that those policies had to help them transition towards systems that were not car dependent, and that's where people could choose sustainable modes for the bulk of their trips. We considered in our analysis that better cars, electric cars, for example, were not enough. We really needed less cars, and for us having less cars, we need a system that is conducive to that, right? We used a number of tools. We combined a number of tools to do that analysis, and we as a result of that analysis, we categorize policies as those having a reactive logic, an anticipatory logic, or a transformative logic or potential. We used causal loop diagrams, stock and flows analysis, mental models analysis, and we also used the Donella Meadows leverage points framework. Some of you may be familiar with as a guide to assess the policy's potential. We also used the iceberg model throughout the process to help people visualize and analogies, and that's one of the lessons learned, I think, from the study, that using visual tools was very important to be able to convey long analysis in short periods of time, and to be able to convey systemic ideas to people not necessarily familiar with a systemic approach. The iceberg model was really useful for that. We also used the analogy of a bathtub that Donella Meadows uses a lot in her books to explain the importance of looking at stocks and flows, and how sometimes a policy can be transformative depending on how locked in the system is, and so how full the bathtub is, in a sense. So yeah, visual analogies were very important.
And I would like, can you please explain a bit more about these tools, and how did you find them useful for different purposes that you apply them to?
Yes. So maybe for some of them, it could maybe make sense that I show maybe a slide. I don't want to do a kind of a slide presentation, but causal loop diagrams were very useful to explain that it is not that people just choose cars because they like cars. They choose cars because, by the way the system is designed, cars are the most attractive and sometimes the only option available. And that opens a lot of doors, because if you consider that people choosing cars is inevitable, let's say, and it's an inevitability of progress in a sense, that's not an English word, but you got what I meant. Then you are limited in your policy efforts to reduce emissions to improve the type of vehicles, because you are assuming that the number of vehicles will continue increasing. Now, if you see that the type of the number of vehicles and the choice people make depend on the system design, and a system design that you can influence through policy making, then that opens door to go beyond just decarbonizing the type of vehicles and doing very different types of policies. And indeed, causal loop diagrams also allow us to see that it is policies that are at the source of the current system design, and thus it is policies that can also change it. To give a more concrete example, let me just maybe share my screen for a second. It's a fairly big causal loop diagram, but just for you to see what we mean. Okay. Do you see it in full screen now? Is it okay?
Yeah.
Yes, super. So basically, I start with that because often the focus of transport policy is to really reduce congestion. Congestion is an issue in many places, and thus we want to reduce congestion. There is pressure from the public to do that, and thus public investment in roads for cars has increased over the last decades, and that's the policy. That's where most of the funding and the efforts in transport policy has gone to increase the infrastructure, the road capacity for cars. Now that is logic if you want to reduce congestion, because for the same amount of vehicles, if you have more road capacity, then you have less congestion, right? Now the issue is that it doesn't stop there. As you increase road capacity for cars and you reduce congestion, then what happens is that the attractiveness of driving a car goes up. The average distance and the number of people and the traffic volume go up, and there you have congestion again. This is called in the transport jargon induced car demand. It's a dynamic that is called induced car demand. It doesn't stop there. Since you have increased the road capacity for cars and you have increased the attractiveness of driving, then you will be reducing the number of users of shared, micro, and active modes, walking, bikes, etc. You will increase the number of cars in the region and increase traffic volume. Again, it doesn't stop there. As you increase the road capacity for cars, you increase the catchment area. That is the area that you commute to every day. As you do that, then you will further increase the attractiveness of driving, because if you need to commute for 40 kilometers every day because now you move farther away, well, a bike is no longer an option, right? Walking is no longer an option. So you further lock yourself in car dependence. And it doesn't stop there, because by increasing the road capacity for cars, and I cannot see that, you reduce the space for active modes, kind of microtransit, public transport, you reduce their adequacy, and thus you further reduce, sorry, it's not working. So you further, by reducing that, you further increase the attractiveness of driving. So that is an example of how the causal loop diagrams can be used to show how locked in we are in a system that is setting the conditions for people to choose cars, which if we want to reduce emissions, is not the best scenario we can have. And that is really related to the road, to a policy that has increased road capacity for cars over decades and has locked in the system there. I may have here, so then we use, for Stockholm Flow, we really use literally bathtubs images, where we explained, for example, on the one of the policies was a budget reallocation away from funding to build road capacity and towards funding for public investments. So one could say, well, you have built a lot of road capacity over the years, and thus the water in the bathtub is that capacity you have built. So by doing a budget reallocation, you are a little bit closing that faucet a bit, because you're reducing the funding for roads. And let's imagine there is a new faucet that pours water, like, I don't know, red water for public transport infrastructure. The issue is that to equilibrate things, just opening a new faucet and closing another one a little bit will not change things very rapidly, because you already have built a stock of road infrastructure. You have already locked in things. So we have used this type of analogy to show that a policy to reallocate budget towards public infrastructure could have been transformative and much more powerful when the bathtub was empty. But now that the bathtub is full, now that we have so much road capacity for cars, then you need more than that to be able to transform a system. Maybe I'll stop there on tools. And then we use, of course, the iceberg model to show where we position the different type of policies.
Very, very interesting. And yeah, thanks for sharing this slide. So I was wondering what challenges, if any, did you have in implementing the systems approach? And did you find any limitations or any restrictions?
Yes, so challenges indeed, there are some. I could also like to talk about what works nicely, because there were several things that work very, very well, and I think that are necessary, kind of were key to the success of the project. In terms of challenges, time was a challenge. It was a very intensive project. Likely we underestimated the time it could take for us to really do an in-depth analysis and assessment of their policies, and tailoring the causal loop diagram to the Irish territories, etc. So it was a very intense project. Another challenge, I would say, is so we are defining policies as anticipatory, reactive, and transformative. Sometimes it's difficult to pass the message that these policies, it's not that anticipatory reactive policies on the top of the iceberg are bad and transformative are good. They are complementary, but sometimes passing this message is not that easy. Very, very very often we go into, okay, so we need to move into the transformative and stop the anticipatory, and sometimes that message, also internally within our team, is a message that is not that easy to pass, the complementarity of things. As well, the notion of a transformative policy is one that varies according to the worldview that you have when you look into it. Sometimes transformative, for example, if we can more from a mechanicist worldview, a policy that reduces emissions by, I don't know, 10, 20%, by a high percentage, is seen as transformative because of the scale of emission reductions, while maybe from a complexity mindset, it's an incremental policy and not a transformative one. So the notion of transformative is so linked to the worldviews that often are implicit, and that is a notion that is not always easy to convey. Maybe those were the main challenges I have in mind. If I may just say a few words on what worked nicely. Visuals, analogies were very important. And so the iceberg model was really useful. The bathtub analysis was really useful. We're not that used to thinking about stocks and flows, so was very useful one. We had a very nice collaboration with the Irish government in the sense that they made a lot of efforts to connect us with the people within the government, and we really, I think we have the right people around the table, which is not easy, and which was very interesting. We looked into 4 different territories that were representative to Ireland, so that it's not only, we were not talking only about cities, we were talking about cities, peri-urban areas, and also rural areas. So having that representativeness was something that was important. Yeah, maybe I'll stop there.
Yeah, so I understand that it was the approach was well received from the Irish ministry, right?
Yes, the approach was very nicely received. People were very enthusiastic about the policy opportunities that thinking in systems opened. I do have a very short video where stakeholders talk about that, so I could share that if that is interesting.
Yeah, maybe now is the moment to share this, so we can. Okay,
let me do that. Let me do that. Yes, I have it here. One sec. Share screen. Hoping it's the right one and not the other one again.
The climate problem requires a systemic change to our society and how our societies operate. And in order for that to happen, we have to move away from small incremental changes that have served us very well in the past, but don't really allow us to address the kind of problems that we have.
If the climate plan the ambition is to reduce emissions by 7% every year, then we need to take much larger steps than we have been taking.
I think there's 2 reasons. One is the ambition that we've set ourselves in Ireland and internationally for emissions reduction. And related to that, the fact that emissions are still growing.
Why do we need a new and innovative approach? The current approach isn't working.
I think the systems innovation thinking and the way that was presented makes it clear why we are in the situation we are here, where the focus of the discourse is generally limited to electric vehicles. So that's one thing. So it was a very nice eye-opener.
Again, it's the systems thinking and seeing, I think for me, being at a room full of other policymakers and seeing the excitement that everybody is having about this and realizing the importance of this. So
it is important to step back and think about the impact that our policies have, and maybe spend time thinking about, are we firefighting, and
reacting to events rather than thinking of, our policy is going to actually achieve long-term transformational change.
The priority to consider and redesign how we do things so that we can tackle this question of reallocation of road space.
How on board everybody is with the systems approach that was explained, and my hope is that there will be enough combined energy from all the various actors to actually make something happen.
Thank you. Very interesting. So, what do you think was the key? Like how would you define the success of this project? Like, what would you think made it successful?
A number of things. So I started a little bit hinting about it. It was a very good collaboration with the government. So in our team we came in with the systemic tools, and by the way, very inspired by the tools in systems innovation in this platform. We came with the kind of practices from other OECD countries as well, international practices, examples that the type of transformation we were talking about was not only possible but already in fact done in some other places in the world. The Irish government, of course, brought their expertise on the context. They were engaged. We built on their input, so we looked into their documents. So they have a lot of strategies, very well written. Everything is very well documented. We did a lot of interviews so the interviews you just saw are interviews we did after the first workshop, but we also, before the workshop, in preparation to the workshop, we also did interviews to make sure we understood their context, to make sure we understood as well the mindsets of the people working in the government, what were their struggles, what were the opportunities they saw, etc. Because of course they know the context much more than we did. So it was very synergetic in that sense. What else? There was as well a political opportunity, in the sense that this project wanted to contribute to the achievement of targets that were already set and that were very ambitious, and they are now being used. So the policy, the report recommendations are being used to revise their climate change action plan. So they are taking into consideration this idea of really of the fact that decarbonizing vehicles is not enough, and we really need to move more towards systems change and systems transformation. So in that sense, I think it worked very nicely. The open-minded. That's a very difficult word. People were very open-minded, and of course that was an asset that is not something we can control for, but in this project people were very open-minded and eager to think differently to what they were used to. Ireland was also very advanced on their thinking, in the sense that they already, for example, have a well-being framework, so they are already thinking just beyond emissions and thinking about people's well-being and how they can prioritize policies that are synergetic, that really reduce emissions but also improve health, safety, etc. So yeah, the context helped a lot, I would say.
And what are the outcomes of the project? How did you define the next steps, or how do you plan to proceed with this?
Yes, so maybe in terms of outputs. So what we produced a report, a very long one. I can share it with you. It's fairly long. We also have a brochure, the videos that you saw. We launched the event with the Minister of Environment and Transport in Dublin, and the Environment Directorate at the OECD. And we did, after the report launch, a second workshop with with people from different ministries, but mainly with people from the Department of Transport. And that workshop was an input to the revised transport section of the climate change, of the climate action plan that is coming forward. Yeah, I don't know if that responds to your question.
Yeah, okay. So I see some very interesting questions here in the chat. Yeah, so feel free to post all the questions that you have. And Mrunali, do you want to go through the questions that we already have, or do you want to ask anything else? Not sure if Mrunali, are you with us? Not sure if the connection is good, but maybe we can go through the questions that we have here in the chat.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Do you want to go through the questions in the chat?
Okay, sure. Yeah, I could go through the questions in the chat, and if there's time left, I could pick up some other ones as well. Yeah? Okay, so the first question we have from Daniel. So Daniel asked, like, the first part of the question, did you also look into the political economy of the transformation? And I could just read the second one as well. How do you get majorities for those high leverage policies you are proposing in jurisdictions in which more than 80% are car drivers?
I'm not sure I got the second one, sorry.
I could maybe just, we could just go with the first one, which is, did you also look into the political economy of the transformation?
Yes, maybe what do you mean by political economy? Are you thinking about something specific? So basically what we did throughout the project was to engage most of the actors that we thought needed to be engaged for the process to continue and to be successful. But maybe if you can specify what do you
Daniel, please.
Yeah, Daniel has this first.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thanks a lot, Mariana, for your insights on that. I mean, that's super helpful. And I mean, I'm also at the OECD, and I missed, unfortunately, the launch event. So that's why I take the opportunity here to ask a few questions. I mean, essentially, it's about a kind of public resistance. I mean, maybe not necessarily specific for Ireland, but in general, you know, you still have like a lot of cities all over the world that are heavily car dependent. And if you propose policies that are trying to change that, even in the long term, if it's for the better, in the short term, it's usually perceived as being pretty challenging. So that's why my question, so how would you transition actually, or what can policymakers do? I mean, of course, you have like a few examples, but I mean, to my understanding, it's usually really like bold leadership that you have, and you don't have that always. So if you don't have that, so what can you do to kind of move the needle a little bit and get the majority for, in the long term, implementing these changes?
Yeah, many thanks for that, and nice to see you here, Daniel. Many thanks for the clarification. Indeed, public resistance is an issue. I could say bold leadership is important and is almost a necessary ingredient. And it can come from the government, it can come from the civil society, but we often do need some leadership, at least inspirational leadership. And indeed, one of the key policy recommendations that we have in the report points to the importance of communication efforts, precisely to help the perception about cars evolve in society. We have car-dependent systems, we have car-centric mindsets, and again, this is not an Irish phenomena, right? This applies to many or most countries in the world. But that is not a chance. That is not by chance that happened. That is the result of decades of communication efforts, right? On linking cars to freedom, to status, to virility, even to power. So that does not change, and that of course stories we know shape the reality that we see and the reality that we don't see. So communication effort is to us one of the key recommendations, so that the benefits of a transition towards systems that are not car dependent are explicit, so that people can experiment those. Change is always difficult, so we need really to allow people to experiment, and actions such as days without cars, etc., are interesting initiatives. Of course, alone cannot do much, but they are important to shift people's perception, as well communicating the dangers of inaction. And what we often see is that communication efforts are not part of the core policies, are more of a nice to have in most cases. And sometimes some policies are actually reinforcing some of the mindsets that lead to public resistance. For example, vehicle electrification, which is very important, of course, but in terms of mental models and mindsets and perceptions, if we consider that most of the emissions can come from improving vehicles, from electric vehicles, for example, we are implicitly reinforcing the mindset that technological changes will be enough, and that there is not necessarily a need to change lifestyles or type of transport. We can continue using cars, just a different type of cars. But then we know in reality that electric vehicles leave many other problems unsolved, right? But some of those are either implicit or not that obvious, and that's why communication efforts we find are very important to indeed reduce a little bit that public resistance that is indeed there.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I could go. Yeah, sorry, you want to add something?
No, go ahead, please.
Yeah. Okay, before I go to the next question, we had a common, like a methodology shared by Eamon. So it was regarding how to understand people's travel behavior. So using probably travel diaries and activity diaries was one of the methods. If you have any comment to add on that.
I cannot hear you very well, so I'm not catching the question. I'm really sorry about it. The sound is strange, and I cannot hear you very well.
Sorry, can you hear me better now?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, so just saying that there was a comment by Eamon when he was sharing a methodology of travel diary and activity diary, which can be used to understand people's travel behavior. So, I mean, just reading it out in case you have any comment to add on that.
Travel diary and activity diary to understand people's travel behavior. Yes, I mean everything, any information that can help us understand the patterns that we observe is very important, and can be really useful. What we are in a way what we are trying with a systemic approach is to link those patterns that we observe and that data and travel diaries can make much more observable to the system structure, to say, hey, those patterns are not inevitable, they are not just that like that, and they don't need to continue like that. They are the result really of a systems design. They are a little bit the tip of the iceberg, but there is a lot below the iceberg that we can modify to change those patterns.
Okay, yeah. So the next question was from Gisela. She's asking, where did you write down the goals, and how did you check to what extent the ideas that were developed support the achievement of these goals? So more in terms of the process of, comparing the goals with the ideas which you had as well through the process, and in terms of how the achievement was supported as well.
Okay, so the question is how we determine the goals of the project of the... So I would like to make sure I understand the question before I respond.
Yeah, if in case, Gisela, if you want to share more on it, or I could probably just reiterate it as well in terms of, so she's asking in terms of how do you write down where did you write down the goals, along with how did you check check to what extent the ideas that were developed support the achievement of these goals. So basically the comparison of goals and the ideas you had and your process of documenting it.
Okay. In the process that we developed, this 3-step process that we saw in the first video, envision, understand, and redesign. The first step is really to think about goals. The first step is about envisioning the outcomes a well-functioning system achieves. And this first step is also about analyzing what goals have taken us to the system that we have today, so to the car-dependent systems, and how those goals need to be modified if we want to get to a different place, right? If you want to bifurcate to another type of system. What we find is that, and maybe I can show a quick slide on that I don't have animated, but since it talks about goals, I think it may be useful to have the visual. Basically, the type of analysis we are doing, so on the left side, you have the current system. On the right side, you have what we define as sustainable system. And this is based on the idea of an iceberg model. So this is here, this is here. So basically what we observe is that let's say there is a widespread mental model that well-being equals mobility, that we need to maximize, that the goal of transport policies is really to maximize mobility and speed. And then the actions that lead from that goal are focused on time savings and speed, which leads to public space allocation to cars, because those are the fast transport modes, right, that allow to save time and speed. Then we realize that they don't always do, because there is congestion, but the logic is there. Then that type of policy focus lead to a system design that is car-centric, where cars are the most attractive modes, which leads to most people using cars for the bulk of their trips. So if we see the travel diary of Irish people and of most people in the world, again, we see a lot of car use, also for short distances. And then we get a system with high emissions, low access, poor air quality, and road fatalities, and what we know many cities lead to. Now, one of the first recommendations of this analysis was to change the goal. We consider that mobility is not a good proxy of well-being, mobility being people being able to move from A to B. We consider that sustainable accessibility is a better proxy of well-being. Sustainable accessibility is the combination of mobility and proximity. And if we change the goal from mobility to sustainable accessibility, we change the way we think, because then actions are no longer focused on time saving and speed, but they are focused on proximity and access by sustainable modes. So we get into public space allocated to sustainable modes and other functions, so that we can create that proximity, a little bit the idea of the 15-minute city. Well, here, when we have this goal, what we tend to create is urban sprawl, a center with all of the opportunities and then sprawled territories. Now, if this is the key policy, then sustainable modes are the most attractive by design, because the system allocates space, basically. And then it is there that the travel diaries may change, and most people may start using sustainable modes, as we see for example, in some cities in the Netherlands. And then you have a system that produces the tip of the iceberg that we see is much more desirable, in the sense that you have low emissions, you have high access, better health, etc. Hoping it more or less respond to your question. Feel free to take the floor otherwise, or write in the chat for a follow-up.
Thanks for clarification, and I think the visual was really useful. Thank you.
Many thanks.
So we had a next question from Raji, which says that how do you measure the effects of the transformation? Have you identified any metrics for it or working with any metrics?
Yeah, so many thanks for that question, and the question on metrics comes up very often, and we definitely need more work on that. When our goal is mobility, the metrics are vehicle kilometers. The metrics are speed. When the goal is sustainable accessibility, then we can start measuring that more closely. And for example, some measures, and I will share the link to the report where we look into those in more detail, but just to give one example. One measure of sustainable accessibility is, for example, how many people or how many opportunities or how many schools or hospitals or kind of things that help us meet our daily needs can we reach within, for example, 10 minutes walk or 15 minutes walk or 10 minutes by bike. So that type of measure allows us to see if we have a system that has created proximity between people and places, because that proximity is fundamental for people to be able to use active modes, walking, cycling, and to avoid long distances on a daily basis, for which you need either a car or a motorized vehicle in any case. So the metrics really depend on the goals you set, and for sustainable accessibility, that is one way of measuring it. There are many others. One could also think about qualitative measures. You could count the number of kids on bikes in the street. I'm just making this up now, but that is not in the report. But there are a lot of ways. If you have envisioned the outcomes that you want to get, then you can assign metrics to those. But the main shift is on the goals you set. Then the metrics, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's, I think, less complicated than really the shift in the mindset. Hoping that helps.
Yeah, let us know, Raji, if you have any more comment on that, but I think we could go to the next question. So the next one was from Trisala, which says that what methodology did you use to come up with really new ideas? Like one of the examples is systematic inventive thinking. So more when you're working with new ideas. Yeah,
so I don't know systematic inventing thinking. So happy to have a link there to know more about it if you can share it, Gisela. Basically what we did, so again, we used the iceberg model as the overall framing. Our objective was to shift the attention from policies that reacted to consequences or patterns of behavior at the top of the iceberg towards policies that really transform the structure and the mindsets having led to those structures that are, as we saw in the coastal loop, they are car-dependent systems. So already the shift between reacting to patterns towards thinking what is the system underlying those patterns and how can we transform them has opened a lot of opportunities for policy intervention that were not there before. As I mentioned earlier, if we start with the idea that people choose cars because they like them and that's their freedom to do that and there is nothing we can do about it, then your scope for policy intervention, if you want to reduce emissions, well, you can electrify those vehicles, you can increase taxes to encourage people to not use the cars that often not politically very attractive, but you're limited to the vehicle at the end of the day. Now, if you go deep, if you dive deeper, and you see that you can actually, that pattern is related to the system structure, and you can transform that structure, you get to policies such as road space reallocation, which is one of our key recommendations, really providing space for safe walking, cycling, and public transport, and taking away some of the space for cars. Most of the public space in cities is attributed to cars today. We consider that as normal. It was not like that before the car was introduced. Parentheses, a very interesting historian called Peter Norton explains that very nicely, and how communication efforts shaped the way we see cities today. So I close the parentheses. So already seeing the kind of the system structure and the mental models underlying it opens the door for policy opportunities. Another key recommendation is the mainstreaming of on-demand shared services. That is, you know, the shared bikes or the e-scooters with public transport, because that can increase the functionality of public transport much faster than if we only have the public sector working on public transport. And we now have the technology to really connect those. Imagine, for example, that with one single transport card, you can access all of the services. Imagine that those services are everywhere, not only in core centers, but also in the periphery, and you can combine with the train, etc. That really increase the system's functionality, and that's the attractiveness of those modes vis-a-vis the car. Yeah, that's what I can say about it.
Okay, thank you. If there's any other comment, let us know, Gisela. But I could go to the last question, which is there from the audience, which is from Brett. So Brett asked, were there people in the room representing property development or banking or lending, etc., so kind of these fields, who influence the way housing is built over time?
I will need to ask you to repeat again. Sorry, I haven't got the question. What are people?
Yeah. So like when you're working towards, or you know, when there's more collaborative work happening. So, and especially when you're looking at how the way housing is built, are there people in the room or within the team from backgrounds of property development or banking and lending, which kind of, and normally they have the influence of the way houses are built?
So your question, if there were, okay, I see it written. Thanks. That were the people in the room representing property development, banking? Yeah. So yes, we had. Sorry, I'm a little bit slow at the end of the day. So we had people we had some people from housing. This project was mainly focused on transport, but we are currently indeed working on the intersection between transport and housing. Of course, road space reallocation and the creation of proximity is more of an urban planning thing than a transport thing. So if you are thinking about transforming the structure or the design of your territory, we definitely need to invite people working on housing and housing commercial buildings, etc., to the room. So they were represented. The first stage of the project was more on transport and public road space. But indeed there is a key intersection there, and I can share maybe a one-pager where we explain what we are currently in the process of doing on that front, if that makes sense.
We've also gotten the link from Gisela, and we just got another question from Ifan as well. So it says, transport systems for net zero seems a mission impossible. So what does net zero mean here?
Yeah, maybe Ifan, why do you see it as a mission impossible? If you can maybe develop on that. Do you mind taking the floor? So in the meantime, I can explain what I mean by net zero. The idea of net zero is that there are no more emissions going to the atmosphere than the emissions that are absorbed. So that's the idea of net zero. You say it's mission impossible, and I would like to know more about it before I give you my perspective on it. Are you up for taking the floor, or not really?
Ifan, you can feel free to put off your mic, or maybe we can wait for a few seconds if he's just typing in something.
Yeah, because transport system is always, we can not, even public transport also has carbon emissions, and it's very unlikely to eliminate all the car users. So I think it's a very tough mission, I think.
Yeah, I see your point, and indeed, and the objective is not to eliminate all car users. That let's make that clear as well. Of course, cars are very useful for many things. The idea of net zero does not necessarily limit to the transport. We could be thinking, for example, of a different use of space, where you have parts of the space that are not urbanized and that are absorbing carbon. So in that sense, it's indeed a cross-sectoral thing. The in particular in the transport sector, indeed the sinks are more difficult. But you could drastically reduce the emissions. And there are emissions, you know, they don't know sectorial boundaries. So you also have oceans that absorb, etc. So yeah. I'm not saying it's easier. It is not easy. And the net zero goal goes really beyond transport and goes as well beyond frontiers. If we want to, it's really a global thing.
Yeah, amazing. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Eamon?
No, thanks.
But I do see your point. Many thanks for it.
Yeah, Carlos added that if this is a Mission Impossible, you'd be the Tom Cruise of this project.
And I'm not saying I can solve this, not at all. But I just choose to say we can do a lot about it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, it's a journey. I mean, it's something that collectively to be done as well.
Yeah.
How about with time, Adriana? Should we take any other question? There's no question from the audience, but if there's any question I should ask.
Maybe we have 1 or 2 minutes more for any other questions. I'm not sure if we
okay.
questions here in the chat about
no, nothing from the chat.
Did we cover the one on did you build any digital services or platforms or ecosystems to achieve the transformation? I'm not sure if we answered this one.
No, we didn't take that one. Thank you. Yeah, so we had another question from Raji, and he was asking, did you build any digital services or platforms or ecosystems to achieve the transformation?
Yeah, many thanks for that one. What we did was to create spaces for exchange and for achieving a common vision or common understanding of what could be the way forward to reduce emissions in the transport sector. We did that mainly through workshops. So we haven't built any digital services as such. We did create spaces, and this is something that maybe the Irish government will be doing moving forward, but we haven't as part of the project.
So would it be something more in terms of an ecosystem or a platform, which is like, if you could tell more, even if it's not digital, anything on the platform you've been working in or the ecosystem that formed?
Well, I mean, in a sense, through the project, we have been engaging stakeholders via interviews, via workshops. Those stakeholders, we could see them as an ecosystem of people potentially working towards the direction of transformation. We don't have a website where stakeholders meet, for example. That's what I mean by digital. That's what I kind of put behind the terms digital platforms. So most of the involvement was in-person involvement through workshops.
And maybe one very briefly before we wrap up, how did you involve all stakeholders?
I just more or less, I mean, we did interviews with them. We worked via workshops, so we consulted them throughout the project, and we did in-person workshops
Raj, does this answer your question? Or do you want to comment anything else? Or Raji, are you here?
Yes, thanks a lot.
Many thanks to you.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, thank you everyone for your participation, and thank you very much, Mariana, for sharing these interesting insights. And so I share here in the chat the report. So here at the beginning, maybe I can share it again. So for you to take a look. And yeah, thank you everyone. And I hope to see you on our next session. Yeah, Mariana, do you want to say?
Thank you for the invitation, and just I wanted to share in the chat credentials for you to access the full report in case you would like to. So let me do that right now.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
There you go. Many thanks to you all for your participation, and of course thanks to SI for the invitation and for all of the resources that you make available to us.
It was a pleasure. Thank you everyone. Bye. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.